Welcome to the Human Element Podcast. I'm Blair. We got Nick up here.
What's up?
So the point of this podcast is for us just to dive into things health as they pertain to humans. That's going to be anything from athletic performance to general health, weight loss, sleep, hydration, you name it. We're just focused on how health applies to humans. Both of us are dietitians or soon to be dietitians, so we're mostly focused in nutrition, but we will have guests on that talk about movement or performance or research or whatever their area of expertise is, just to try to get a more well-rounded approach to human health. So the name Human Element comes from, that's actually the name of the LLC that I own, my business, my nutrition business. But where that name came from is it's kind of multifactorial, which a lot of things in my life I like to be that way, is having depth to them. But the name originally came from an inspiration. Actually, I don't know how many people watch Mad TV. I know SNL was kind of big, but there's a skit on there where an alien, is running for president. And he's trying to convince people he's not an alien. His name is Smith, John, Human American for president. And so that was my handle on a lot of stuff. My email address, video games, stuff like that. I was Human American for a long time. And my favorite movie of all time, I actually have a tattoo. You might have seen the pictures. You got Zorg back here from The Fifth Element. It's my favorite movie. So my roommate kind of suggested those two words together and thought it sounded cool. And to me, it spoke more to my heart, which is that I think the most important aspect of any thing on the planet, really, but any business, any venture, any outcropping, and we'll actually probably dive into this as my way, like everything that's going on in the world right now. But humans are the most important thing, because it doesn't matter what you take, law, nutrition, whatever, like the information is somewhat straightforward. It's humans that make it interesting and add this complexity, but also beauty to it. So the human element is the focus on humans as the primary element of business or support or social structure or whatever it is. Like the humans really do matter the most, as much as they can annoy us at times. So that's kind of where it sits with me, just so y'all know.
Yeah. Plus, I mean, so it also sounds badass. I mean, the human element, like,
Came up with a
fantastic
cool
logo and everything too.
logo. Yeah, I was about
Yeah.
to say the logo was
So
that was a driving force behind it, because
yeah,
I love periodic table of elements.
yeah,
Um,
it's awesome.
yeah.
It was, and so just for everybody, like, I was actually the one who suggested the name of that for this podcast. I was like, hey, look, you got a bomb ass name, bomb ass logo. This, like, are you cool with us using that? And so, of course, here we are.
Yep. So, episode 2, we're going to talk about hydration today. We kind of touched on it a little bit last time, and actually, I wanted to kick off by correction that I stated in the last episode. I said that um, there was a leading 1 point on the USG's 1 point whatever. It's actually 1.0 and then the number. So it's not 20% more dense, it's 2% more dense. So it's even more fine tuned and finicky than you might expect. So yeah, if the number was 200, it'd be 1.0200. Just a quick correction on USG and me misspeaking on the last episode. So wanted to apologize to anybody I might have offended. That's not true. I don't apologize to people for offending them. But if that annoyed you, then here's my correction. I was incorrect and now I am correct.
Yeah.
So
And so what that sounds
cool.
a little bit as sounds like code for Blair offended himself. And so really he's apologizing to himself through you.
Yeah,
So
I'm almost embarrassed. If I had shame, I'd be embarrassed that I got that wrong.
yes, so if
Um,
everybody listening can allow Blair to forgive himself through that apology, like, he
that's
would
rich.
greatly appreciate it and he can move on.
Yeah.
Um,
No, if not, we're gonna. That's the whole episode, is us hanging up
yeah,
on that
yeah, I
one.
mean,
Yeah.
so if not, unfortunately, bye. But so
Yeah. See ya. Yeah.
one
Um,
thing that was interesting with this is, so Blair mentioned that he's a dietitian. I'm an undergrad in the process of becoming a dietitian. And so there's a different level of what our capabilities are. Of course, Blair being the expert in nutrition, much more experience with research. So where that came in with this is I actually found a little bit of a hard time finding some hydration research with how it pertains to athleticism. And before we started this recording, I mentioned that, and so Blair was like, "Oh shit, I found a lot." So we're gonna have there's two clear differences here, but it's all in perspective.
That just comes with time, man.
Yes.
Like I
Yeah.
wrote so many damn papers where I'd have like 50 studies open, and
Yep.
like start picking through which ones are relevant. Like
Yeah.
you just kind of get faster and more adept at it.
Yeah.
But
And that's also one of the things that made me excited about doing this because it forced me to go into the research and it forced me to get better at it. So.
yeah, and I think like my friend Elizabeth actually will plan on doing the research episode with us. She
Sweet.
finishes her PhD at the end of this month,
Oh,
so she'll be Dr. Foley. Yeah, so
dang.
she's excited to hop on, and we'll do a whole episode on research and what it looks like, what it means, how to interpret it, and that kind of
Yeah,
stuff.
that's
So
awesome.
yeah, I look forward
Congratulations to her.
having a guest. Yeah, I know that's exciting. So yeah, I think one of the more important things to start with on this episode is what is hydration. Um, I think most people think that hydration just means drinking water, and they don't really take into account how much the electrolyte balance matters into that. And to the tune of, I often, not even just players, but anybody, players for sure, but anybody that I dealt with on a nutritional standpoint, and some that just have come up in conversation, my most common question when people say like, "Oh, this and this and this is happening," you know, I feel like I drink water all the time, and the first question is, "Well, do you pee constantly? Are you constantly pissing?" Because if you're drinking a lot of water but you're urinating constantly, you're not hydrated. You're taking in water but you're not retaining it. Your body is just eliminating it as quickly as you're receiving it. So it's not just drink water, be hydrated. And I think that's a huge, actually, water can cause, this might sound funny, but can cause more negative effects by drinking too much of it without proper sodium and electrolyte imbalances. And that's another thing, is I should probably clarify. Electrolytes are minerals. They're metals. Salt is the most common one, but sodium, chloride, magnesium, potassium, and calcium are the major players. I mean, but anything with an ionic charge can be used as an electrolyte, and they all have their functions. Calcium has a lot of functions in muscle contraction. Um, Sodium has major players in like fluid retention. Potassium is like widely used by muscles and the heart. So they all have effects outside of just fluid retention and hydration, but they are major players in the hydration equation. So hydration is having a proper fluid and electrolyte balance for optimal human function. Like that's really what we need to go ahead and clear up at the beginning, is that it's not just fluid and water. It also includes these electrolytes and the ability to retain water, not just consume water. So
So what's really interesting, and I'm gonna learn a lot throughout the course of this podcast, was actually that I mean, if you're drinking a lot and you're peeing a lot, you're not really hydrating. I didn't. Hindsight, it's kind of clear, but I didn't think about that honestly, and I'm sure that's a lot of listeners are the same. Like, oh, I'm drinking a lot. If I'm peeing a lot, then that must mean I'm hydrated. But so I mean, I guess not. The fluid retention is a
right.
huge part, huge idea in that. But so of course Blair talked on electrolyte balance, and so that's part of how in your body, I have in my notes that water carries molecules in your body. So the more hydrated you are, the better you can have molecule fluctuations, and your metabolism can work a little bit better. My understanding, just trying to connect the dots logically on that. And then water also helps in digestion. So if you were constipated, drink some water, and that should help soften things up. Things like Muralax, Metamucil, they draw water into your colon, so that would be something that has an effect in it. And these are kind of things that I've just sort of pieced together. I haven't really looked up any of this. So Blair, if I say anything wrong, like cut me off, like just be like,
Oh,
hey, you're
no,
wrong. Stop.
you're spot on. Like, and that's the thing, is water's involved in most of the processes in our body. So it's super important to have a good balance there to make sure that, that you are retaining water and keeping it in the system, because like you said, just piecing it together logically, Dehydration first affects blood volume. So less water means less blood volume, means thicker blood. So your blood is actually more dense or has more, dissolvents into it, whether that's the actual blood cells or proteins or cholesterol or whatever's being carried around for its intended purposes, are thicker in the blood because there's less water, but you haven't removed those solutes within the fluid. So all of a sudden, and I mean, I can pull up the studies and how, like, what it does to you that I've written down, but you just think about that logically. Less blood volume means that your heart has to work harder to move blood around. Less blood volume means that you're actually not going to return as much blood to the heart and therefore have less blood to expel from the heart. So it becomes a self-defeating cycle when you're dehydrated. So just looking at, I wrote down somewhere, so water maintains blood volume, regulates body temperature, and is involved in muscle contractions. Perspiring is regulated by the autonomic nervous system and is controlled unconsciously by the hypothalamus, the structure of the brain that regulates the body's status quo. Sweating is the body's primary way of maintaining optimal body temperature. Consuming liquids replenishes the fluids lost during exercise. Restoring fluids maintains normal muscle function, helps prevent a decrease in physical performance, and reduces the risk of heat stress. The symptoms of external heat stress are tachycardia, which is an increased heart rate, hypotension, which would be low blood pressure because you have less volume in the same space, hyperventilation, so your lungs are working harder to breathe in more oxygen because your blood can't carry oxygen as well, vomiting, diarrhea, seizures, and coma. Despite these serious effects, many athletes do not seriously consider the effects of hydration on athletic performance. And it dives even deeper than that as far as way it affects increasing muscle glycogen utilization because your body's not using energy as properly, which would therefore decrease performance because you don't have the energy being directly used for the muscle function at hand. It's using to overcome a deficiency in blood volume and oxygen transport. So there's all these things that go into it, just even thinking logically about the reduction in blood volume and its cascade of effects. But absolutely, I mean, if you're not retaining enough water, your body is working harder. How much of our body is water? 70%, I think, is the general
Yeah,
statistic, somewhere
more than
around
50.
there.
So definitely
Yeah,
the majority.
more than half of our body is water in some way, whether bound or free. So removing something so vital that's such a huge component of our body, even in small amounts, like it's not 70% by accident, like it needs that much water to function properly. So removing any amount of water or not replenishing water would definitely diminish not just athletic performance, but cognition, fatigue, like general everyday life type stuff is going to be worse off when you're dehydrated.
Yeah, and on top of the health in general aspect of that, so if your blood is thicker and you have atherosclerosis, which is fatty buildup in your arteries, more things are going to be rubbing up against that, which is more likely to have it become inflamed, which you're more likely to have a heart attack at that point, which is also one of the things that got me into nutrition, was trying to avoid heart disease and help people prevent heart disease. So that would be a huge thing there, just singularly in the health aspect, but so like Blair said, cognition and just overall health. So hydration is super important for athletic performance, health, all of life, and like Blair said, it's not an accident that your body is 70 or plus percent water.
Right. And here I found the remaining things then this starts to get more into athletic performance effects, but still, dehydration may cause a reduction in blood volume, decreased skin blood flow, so your ability to regulate heat is now diminished, decreased sweat rate, so that's also a heat mechanism. So I actually had someone ask this who's a regular exerciser the other day, and I found it interesting. So sweat is a way to reduce body temperature. The way it works is your body sweats and then that water evaporates, causing a cooling effect. You do lose electrolytes in sweat, so there will be salt and potassium are the two primary ones lost in sweat. But Sweat is used to cool the body, much like an air conditioner. Like that's why when you are sweaty or wet and you get under a fan, it's so much colder than if you were dry skinned, because of the way the water evaporates and adds a cooling effect to your body. So with a reduced sweat weight, we're also reducing our ability to cool off. Decrease heat dissipation. So three already we've listed that are our ability to remove heat from the body. Increased core temperature, that seems obvious based on the previous three, and an increased rate of glycogen use, which I mentioned earlier. The most likely physiological mechanism affecting a person's maximal aerobic power, VO2 max, and hence athletic performance, is one's maximal cardiac output. So that's going back to blood flow. So all of a sudden, your total cardiac output, your power, your ability to dissipate heat, your ability to control your internal temperature are all like totally off because of a loss of water. And if you think about it, if my blood is thicker, if I have less water, am I going to put that shit on my skin to cool down, or am I going to use it for vital functions? So that's kind of the way you got to look at it. But yeah, so as dehydration reduces plasma volume and therefore increases blood viscosity, central venous pressure decreases and reduces the amount of blood returning to the heart. During peak athletic intensity, these changes can decrease the amount of blood entering the heart during diastole, the phase of the cardiac cycle where the heart relaxes and fills with blood. Less blood entering the heart during diastole decreases the amount of blood that may possibly leave the heart during systole, the phase where the heart contracts, consequently decreasing cardiac output. So that's in the words of a researcher, not me just rambling. So,
And so on that with the diastole aspect of it, so if somebody had something like congenital heart disease, and would hydration be even that much more important? Because I think congenital heart disease is where their heart doesn't contract completely to get all the blood out of it. And is that correct?
I'm not sure. Like, I think
Okay.
you honestly know more about clinical nutrition than I do. It's not my area of
Okay.
expertise, but I would argue that anything where the heart is not working properly, especially if that's a contractile issue or an expulsion issue, like you mentioned with atherosclerosis or narrowing or hardened arteries, anything where the heart is beating irregularly or there's a you know missed beat. If there's anything where the heart's not sending blood out in a uniform and high enough volume, then I would say hydration is of the utmost importance. I mean, you're just asking a weak heart to work harder instead of a strong heart to work harder. Is kind of the way I think it would boil down to as far as hydration and heart health. If that makes sense.
Yeah. And last thing, as far as getting on tangents for me, is one thing you said earlier was that.
Don't make promises you can't keep.
Oh
By the
well,
way. Yeah.
for this
Now.
one, yeah,
For
for
this
now.
for this minute. This is the last hand.
Yeah.
It's, yeah.
But one thing that really rang out for me was where just hyperventilation with a lack of hydration. So we're gonna have to back up a little bit. So stay with me. I drink a lot of caffeine. And so I believe caffeine directly inhibits ADH, which is antidiuretic hormone. When you inhibit ADH, you're going to pee a lot, you're going to lose a lot of hydration. And one thing I notice when I get to the higher levels of caffeine is I'm like, man, it feels harder to breathe. And so that could be a hydration indicator. I know it's multifaceted because
Yeah. So
increased
the
levels
reason
of caffeine will do the
the
same
reason I
thing.
don't think that is because you don't see any increased urinary output from caffeine until you reach about 6 milligrams per kilogram of intake.
Okay.
So for a guy my size, about 100 kilos would be uh, what 600 milligrams of caffeine. I mean that would be drinking two bangs within an hour, two
Yeah.
bang energy drink. I
Yeah.
mean, so like
That's
that's insane. I mean, I don't drink that in a day. Now I'm sure that's considering taking coffee or a pre-mixed beverage where you are adding water back into the system. But there's been there's most studies on caffeine and urinary output. Like there were aspects of kidney like glomerular filtration rate and things like that increased with caffeine, but not directly urinary output.
gotcha.
So it wasn't until that 6 milligram per kilogram point where you actually saw an increase I think it just boils down to most energy drinks are not high in sodium or
Mm-hmm.
electrolytes. Maybe they are, depending on which one you buy. Coffee's not particularly high in any electrolytes except for magnesium. So you are drinking more fluids when you drink caffeine, and people, there's a subconscious, oh, it's making me pee more. It's like, well, no, you had 3 cups of coffee. That's at minimum 24 ounces of water that you just had. I mean, so um, if research emerges that proves that wrong, fine. But most of what I've seen, and my major professor was pretty adamant about it, was that it's very difficult to reach a dehydrating effect from caffeine.
Hmm. Gotcha. Well, definitely. Then that kicks my high school health class to the curb, where they
Oh
said
yeah, there's yeah.
anything.
Oh,
Yeah.
I just learned like 3 days ago. I found research showing that there is no caffeine creatine interaction. Like everyone promotes that, and for the longest time, I was just like, yeah, I mean, I guess that
Dang.
makes sense. No, it's bullshit. Actually, the people that drank creatine and caffeine together had a, and this is where you can start kind of picking research and splitting hairs. People that drank creatine and caffeine together had more serum creatine, but is serum creatine muscle
Yeah,
creatine? You
that's
know, so that's which is where you want your creatine is in the muscle providing energy.
yeah.
So, you know, I'd like to see that does serum creatine from that, or is there an inhibition effect at the muscle uptake level because of the caffeine, which I doubt, but it'd be interesting. But
Yeah.
still, that was kind of mind blowing to me. That I was like, no, what? Okay, so that's
Yeah,
how it
and
works.
I would consider the serum creatine, I mean, essentially, we'll put quotations around it, but ineffective creatine, just
Right.
because
It's, I mean, until
it's
it's
not
in a
doing
muscle, it's
anything.
not doing
Yeah.
anything. Yeah.
Um,
So the final bit on dehydration, following the cardiac output, increased core temperature during a dehydrated state is accompanied by a larger aromatic amine response, possibly leading to an increased rate of glycogen breakdown in the muscles. So ultimately, just take home that it probably increases glycogen use and breakdown in the muscle. An increased rate of glycogen breakdown may contribute to an increased level of fatigue in the muscle used during the athletic activity. The breakdown of glycogen during exercise leads to an intracellular increase of acids, primarily lactic acid. As lactic acid is produced by the breakdown of glycogen, pH decreases, causing skeletal muscle fatigue. So you're also looking at actual physical breakdown and fatigue due to dehydration at the muscular level. So, you know, definitely makes sense that you would see some athletic reduction or reduction in athletic performance based on just the theory or the mechanism behind what dehydration does to the body.
yeah, and that actually lines up with one of the articles that I have, which showed increases in muscular strength and muscular endurance with increases in hydration. So
Yeah,
those two line up. Yeah.
yeah. I mean, so depending on your population, your clientele, I can tell you right now that if I went and said this kind of shit to the players,
Yeah.
nothing. It wasn't gonna do anything. And now that we're kind of like back on to more hands-on anecdotal stuff, one thing that we kind of touched on with the drinking water and urinating a lot is the whole concept of the color scale with how hydrated you are. Which is what, like, you put the chart up, and the yellower it gets, the more dehydrated you are, which to some degree works fine. My problem is I don't think that necessarily having clear water color, like clear urine, necessarily means that you're hydrated, because you could drink water and it could go straight through you. And I don't think that having like certain B vitamins, while it is more of a neon hue, do make your urine yellow. So having yellow urine is not necessarily automatically more dehydrated than having non-yellow urine. When it starts to look orange, brown, like I've seen red, which is
Oh,
rhabdomyolysis, but
yeah.
like, I mean, yeah, it's, and I think sometimes players just fuck with us. Like they would pour like drip drop or some sort of ORS into it to make it look weird. But yeah, like the color thing's a good scale. The darker it is, the worse off you are. But just having a color to it does not mean you're dehydrated, or that having less color to it you're more hydrated. Like I think that's, it's, and we'll talk about this later with the article you brought up. It's like BMI. People bash it or praise it or whatever they want to do with it, and I just don't think they understand it. I think it's too simplified for people, and they just sit there and say like, oh well, it's bullshit because my BMI is like 28 or something. I don't know what it is. I'm 5'10", 215 pounds. You know, like my BMI is high, but it doesn't, that doesn't mean anything to me. At the same time, it's not a worthless metric, and I'll talk about that with the article when it comes up. But yeah, so I think hydration kind of falls into the same thing. Is like it's a good rule of thumb, but if you're concerned about hydration, you need to find a way to test it, whether that's with urine specific gravity or some other method that's not just eyeballing the color of it. So
Yeah, and with eyeballing it, I guess we could really sort of just deal with extremes when you don't have specific ways to test it. Just go, well, if it's brown or orange, like you mentioned in the last episode with one of your players, if it's super dark, you need to drink. If it's clear, don't assume that you're hydrated. It could just be you're not retaining water. Go see what happens if you have something that's a little bit higher in some sort of electrolytes. We would want to say still try to keep sodium low, but that salt is a really accessible electrolyte for us. But be careful about that. I won't quite endorse like, oh, go sprinkle some salt in your water and drink it. Like
I will.
Okay,
I will.
there we go.
Yeah, I will. So the main reason behind that is the idea that salt affects blood pressure is entirely genetic. You have a genetic marker that determines whether sodium will increase your blood pressure or affect your blood pressure. To some people, it will. A decent serving of salt and their blood pressure is spiking, and some people can have as much sodium as they want, and it doesn't make a difference. Beyond that, I think some of the sodium recommendations are low, and that's the thing. I actually wrote an article on protein on one of the companies I work for's website, and this is something we can dive into a podcast. Is there such thing as too much protein and the right amounts of protein to eat? But it kind of fell into the same thing with sodium, is that people have they have the idea of how much is right based on RDA. And the RDA of all the minerals, proteins, nutrients, whatever it is enough so that the majority, 98% of the population, do not see deficiencies. It's not about optimization or thriving. It's just finding a level where everyone is kind of healthy. So there's going to be individual needs.
Yeah, and I do want to clarify that RDA stands for recommended daily allowance adequacy.
I don't know. That's why I don't, because I feel like it changed. Yeah, it's recommended dietary allowance, I believe is the.
There we go.
So the idea, I would have to dig that. I should have dug this study up, but I found one showing that the recommendations were criminally low for people who are active regularly in heat and humid environments. So like Florida or South Carolina, where we live, like it's both hot and humid a lot. We're near the ocean and it's the South. So they showed athletes working out in this kind of environment needed 20 milligrams per pound of body weight, which would be almost, for my size, would be almost double the amount of sodium that they say is the max, 2,300 milligrams. So that's because of the amount of sweat loss and the amount of exercise. And I mean, I'm a heavy sweater too. So if you sweat more, you're going to lose more salt, so if you're a heavy sweater and someone tells you to minimize your salt intake, those two things don't go well together, because the more you sweat, the more sodium you're going to lose. And so you lose fluids, you lose everything in your body from a small series. There's only so many exits. When you lose fat, you breathe it out. People don't want to believe that, but you breathe in oxygen, you breathe out carbon dioxide. That carbon is the weight you're losing. That's where, it's heat energy, which is from exercising, but it's carbon, so your weight can either dissipate through your skin, whether that's through heat, energy, or liquid. It can be breathed or, excreted through your mouth, whether that's spit, vomit, whatever you want, or it can come out as urine or feces. That's how you lose anything from your body, from your system. It has to come out of one of those systems. So most of your water is lost through sweat from exercise, through urine, and then breathing. You actually can lose up to a pound or two every night just from normal breathing. So, it's important to notice that you, depending on how you tend to, if you don't sweat heavily, you're not as at big of a risk of losing sodium as you are if you are a heavy sweater. You'll still lose some through urinary output, but you know, that's why it's so individual and not just easy to say like sodium bad, like coconut water. It's, I mean, it's good and potassium helps, but sodium is the end all be all for hydration and as far as electrolytes. You know, so it's not so cut and dry. I mean, I
Yeah.
think we're gonna.
Yeah.
That's, you know.
Which I'm really glad that this little sidebar came up was because I've noticed, I think recently the American Heart Association reduced the amount of sodium intake that they recommend to 1,500 milligrams
Yeah,
a
I
day.
did see that.
And I think that was a drop by 1,000 milligrams. It was either
It's
2,500
like
milligrams.
it's 800. It was 23
Oh,
was the
okay.
previous one. Yeah.
Okay, so a drop by almost a gram. And not that I don't study sodium, anything like that, but that just felt off.
Yeah.
But I think really they're looking at the United States population as a whole, which is largely sedentary. So if you're not that active, you're not doing some sort of workout, physical exertion, you're not breathing heavy, you're not sweating, then you're not losing a lot of these electrolytes and everything that Blair was just talking about. So on top of with it being individual, depending on where you live, consider your activity level also. So if you don't do a whole lot of activity, you don't have a physical labor job, your sodium requirement might be lower. So it kind of the easy cop out answer with anything in health is, oh, it depends on you, but it depends on you.
Yeah, it does. And I guess a caveat too to my aside is I don't eat processed foods for the most part, which are very high in sodium as a preservation and taste. I mean, it's definitely part of taste. I get so bothered when people tell me like, "Oh, I don't really use salt. I just add a bunch of herbs and blah blah." Herbs, spices, those are flavors. Salt is taste. I mean, they're two different things in my mind. Salt amplifies the taste of the thing you're putting on, the flavor of the thing you're putting on. But herbs without salt are boring. Like, I just don't try to convince
Yeah.
me that's good because your food's bland. Um, but I don't eat a lot of processed foods that are laden with sodium. I also strongly encourage people to use a like jar of kosher salt as opposed to a grinder, and I liken it to using a credit card versus cash. When I have my little container of salt and I'm pinching it, I can feel how much salt is coming out of my hands. I can see it because it's large coarse salt. It should look like snow when it's hitting the ground before it melts. And I know that sounds funny coming from a Florida boy, but I have seen snow before. So,
We're not
but
convinced.
yeah. So basically, you have more control, which is like if you spend cash, you know how much money is leaving your hands. So it's easier to regulate how much you're spending versus just swiping a card. It adds up behind the scenes and you don't really realize it. So using a grinder to move your salt, you're not in control like you are if you're using your hands to actually feel the salt leaving your fingers. So those things, like I salt each layer of my meal, so I don't oversalt any one part of it, but I don't salt the end of my meal. I salt each component individually and taste it. Oh, this is too salty. I should add some more veggies and rice. Oh, this isn't salty enough. I can add some more salt. That way I have total control, and it's not like I get to the end of the dish and it's bland and I'm just trying to load it with salt to make it taste good.
I like
But
that. Sorry, go ahead.
I mean, just things like that are why I also feel like I'm a fan of salt, but it's because I don't have a lot of hidden salt in my diet. I don't eat a lot of added sodiums and things like that.
Yeah.
So
And I like that analogy, comparing it to using a credit card or cash, because I mean I've got a salt grinder right over here next to me. I'm sitting at the kitchen table. But you kind of do get into a little bit of a rhythm when
oh yeah,
you're grinding it. So I actually didn't think about that. That's a fantastic analogy there. So
yeah. I
love to-
came up with it. I have a friend's dad who would have a conversation while he was salting
Yep.
his salad. Who's a salad?
I've
I'm already
never-
on the
I've never
fence
seen
about
that.
salads. Like it's salad. Nobody likes salad. People like salad
fuck
dressing.
salad.
you
Yeah.
know, and the dressing's not the best. And I mean, I make a homemade Greek yogurt ranch. It's pretty good. So I actually do like salads with that on it. But like it emulates real ranch. Like I don't want a fucking salad with balsamic vinegar. Shut up. Um, but yeah, he would sit there and the whole like a full conversation salting his salad, and
Well,
I'm
so
like,
here's the thing. He was salting his salad because
mm-hmm.
salad tastes like shit.
Yeah,
Like,
yeah, I agree. Mm-hmm.
so Blair's an anti-diet dietitian. When I'm a dietitian, I'm gonna call myself the non-salad dietitian.
Anti-salad. I don't. I've had a killer salad. Don't get me wrong. I had a
And
salad that I
they're
still
out
talk
there.
about. Yeah,
They're out
but
there. I won't eat them. Like,
yeah, it's like turkey bacon. Like I've had them, and it's not always been terrible. But
yeah,
don't talk to me about turkey bacon.
yeah.
So, but yeah, so that's where I mean, that's salt is kind of a touchy subject for that reason. I think there are some people who don't need as much or vastly overconsume salt, but then there's a lot of people who have this fear of it because of the way they've kind of put it in the media.
Mhm.
Um, you
And
know,
so also too, with where again it gets individual. So with Blair's salt habits, salt in each individual layer, looking like snow right before it melts. We will keep in mind he's a super active dude. I know when we were organizing the first episode, it was like every time we'd get off a call, he's like, "Oh, um, I'm about to go biking," or "I just finished up a bike ride," or "Just finished up a bike ride. I'm gonna go shoot some hoops or something." Blair is a super active dude. On top of he doesn't eat a whole lot of processed foods. So, again, take note of your lifestyle, what's going on, and consider that. And if you don't know how to factor that into what you're doing, reach out to one of us on our Instagram. So my Instagram is at Hion_health. So it's actually HION_health. So kind of like the ions while we're talking about electrolytes. And then Blair's, I don't want to accidentally mess up yours.
oh, so mine's fat.to.fit.nutrition. Fat to fit nutrition with periods between each word. Um, but yeah, I think that's an awesome thing to add in. And you don't have to specifically work with me for me to give you an answer to something if it's an easy thing like that. You know, if you are interested in working with me, by all means, I accept clients. But at the same time, like if your question is just, hey, here's kind of my lifestyle, am I eating too much salt? Like that takes me, I mean, it might take me a day or so to get back to you and look at it, but you know, I I like that kind of stuff. I value answering questions for people in need if they just have a quick question for me. So,
Yeah. You don't become a
um,
dietitian because it's lucrative. You do it because you love it.
right.
Like it's not
I'm gonna try
lucrative.
to make it lucrative,
Like
but
you try, you
yeah,
can
yeah,
try, but there's a lot easier ways to get get
yeah. Like
the
you're not. Don't do this for the glory or money, because let me tell you, it ain't there.
yeah.
Um, but yeah, so kind of getting back to the physical performance thing, and I kind of mentioned, and we went off on a tangent there about how if I mentioned to my players all those health effects, that it would mean nothing. It just go straight past them. Um, but so when you look at some of the actual effects on performance, then they kind of start to perk up. So this study showed a loss of sweat equal to 2% of our body weight causes a noticeable, sorry, I can't speak, decrease of physical and mental performance. Losses of 5% or more of body weight during physical activities may decrease the capacity for work by roughly 30%. So 5% of your body weight would be about a 30% reduction in power output, work capacity. In addition to dehydration affecting the capacity for work, losses of perspiration greater than 2% of body weight increase the risk of nausea, diarrhea, vomiting, and gastrointestinal problems. So while you're not seeing at 5% of body weight, which that might sound like a lot, 5% of your weight, I mean at 200 pounds is what? 10 pounds?
Yeah.
So that sounds like a lot. I had players regularly lose 15, 17 pounds in practice, 3 hours of practice. I
Shit.
mean, so we mostly tracked hydration. We did the USG, but we did weights, pre and post practice weights, especially during camp when it was the hottest and they were lifting or working out every day. But yeah, I mean, they would weigh in their boxers, they'd weigh back out in their boxers, and the difference in weight is how much they lost. And some guys are out there drinking on the field and taking electrolyte solutions and stuff like that, and still losing 2, 3, 4, 5% of their body weight. Um, so if you're losing 17 pounds at 250 pounds, like, yeah, you're getting close to that five. I mean, that's a lot of weight. I mean,
Yeah.
that's almost 10% of your body weight. So you're definitely hitting that. But then with the risk of nausea, diarrhea, vomiting, etc., like GI distress, if you're throwing up, if your stomach's all out of whack, you ain't playing at the best of your game. I mean, we're not all Michael Jordan playing with the flu during the finals, so like, I mean, that can happen, but I mean, that's a tough ass individual that can do something like that. So even at 2%, you're looking at a reduction and possible reduction in athletic performance due to other factors. Um, this kind of will go back to something I mentioned about breathing out, like losing hydration or water during sleep. Sprint athletes are generally less concerned about the effects of dehydration than are endurance athletes. However, the capacity to perform high intensity exercise, which results in exhaustion within a few minutes, is reduced by as much as 45% prior dehydration, corresponding to a loss of only 2.5% body weight. Half the loss of what that tells me is the higher the intensity, the less room you have with dehydration. Half the dehydration, 5 versus 2.5, showed a 45% reduction versus 30 in high intensity exercise. So while sprint typically doesn't have a lot of sweat loss due to the short duration of it, they're talking about prior dehydration, which would be if you traveled, you do lose a couple pounds during flights because of the change in pressure and the lack of hydration that typically occurs during traveling. Hydration practices, I should say, as well as sleep, which can cause reductions. So if your hydration's not on point, not just day of, but during travel, leading up to it, pretty much always, you can see up to 45% reduction in work output. I mean, that's insane. That's half of you. I mean, that's
Yeah.
half of your output. So,
So, I mean, if you are concerned about performance and you're overlooking hydration, you're making a huge mistake. I know everybody sort of overlooks hydration. I know I do. I don't know about Blair. Most likely, he's less likely to look over it because he's actually tested it, all of that. But I know hydration, it's such a common thing. You hear it so often, you just start to ignore it. And so you're about to hear it again. Focus on hydration. It's super, super important.
I regularly did my hydration when we were testing the players.
Mm.
Sometimes I didn't because you play with so many different people's piss. You don't want to play with your own.
Yeah.
But I was regularly borderline between 100 and
Mm-hmm.
200 on that USG scale. And I mean, I drank close to 32 ounces within 2 hours of waking up and getting to the facility. I carried around a giant, like 64-ounce half-gallon water jug and drank that almost every day, as well as the other fluids I had, whether that was Propel or whatever was available in the facility. Um, so I mean, I was easily crushing a gallon of water most days, and still was kind of in that borderline. I mean, obviously depended if I worked out before we did hydration testing and that kind of stuff.
Yeah.
But, so if you're not a performance athlete, if you're just listening for general health, I mean, this even small performance study can apply to you. So a study investigated the capacity of 8 subjects to perform treadmill walking. 25% of VO2 max, which is low. Like, you won't even see health benefits at 25% of VO2 max. I think you got to operate in like 40+% of VO2 max to really see like training benefits. With a target time of 140 minutes. So we'll just say 2 hours, but 140 minutes. So low intensity treadmill walking for around 2 hours in a very hot, dry condition. So when they were hydrated, and this will apply going forward, and I'm sure will remind you, there's 3 prefixes that are, especially with hydration, but anything involving, levels within your system. So there's hypo, hyper, and U. So EU, which means balance. That's hydrated means you're hydrated. Hyper would be overly hydrated, and hypo would be underhydrated. So hydrated state, so their hydration is on point. And when they were dehydrated by 3, 5, or 7%, those are the three numbers they picked out of body mass. All 8 subjects were able to complete 140 minutes walking when hydrated and 3% dehydrated. So this is low intensity. So after 3%, 7 of the 8 finished at 5%. But when dehydrated by 7%, 6 subjects out of 8 stopped walking after an average of only 64 minutes. So not even half the amount of time. So even for relatively low intensity exercises, you're looking at a diminishment and an inability to finish. So walking at a treadmill is at 25% of VO2 max is nothing. I mean, you can do that for your entire life and never really get fatigued. I mean, you might get bored, but you're never going to get physically fatigued. So, like, I would argue doing work tasks is more involving and demanding than this, depending on what your job is and how engaged you are by it. But, cooking is probably more demanding and engaging than this, so if at that percent, like, if you find yourself consistently unable to stay focused, finish tasks, things like that, like, if you're a woman, it might be iron, it might be anemia. I know a lot of girls that complain about lethargy and tiredness and they just don't get enough iron in their diet. But look at hydration first. It's a very easy fix. Even if you buy some sort of rehydration solution like
Liquid IV.
Liquid IV, drip drop, more common over the counter ones you'll see are like Propel, so those kind of things, like, they're cheap. You can buy them in powdered form, so you don't have to like go buy a 24 pack of Propel, but like, just adding those things that give you a little flavor, even Crystal Light, something to get you drinking more fluids, and you might notice a huge difference in your ability to finish tasks, exercise intensity, all kinds of stuff. So, hydration isn't a joke. It's it seems like one of those words that makes a lot of sense and is easy, but there's a lot involved there. So,
yeah. And the easy stuff is always hard.
That
doesn't make any sense on paper, but
right. But people brush it over.
Yeah.
Oh, that's easy. Hydration. Yeah, I can drink more water. It's like, well, do you? It's like sleep. I think sleep's probably one of the most important things, and we'll have a whole talk on sleep. God, we could have 2.
I fucking hate sleep.
But it's so big. Like, basically
huge.
Everything that you do goes through the sleep and REM sleep system, memory, muscle recovery, yada, 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 DNA. I mean, everything. So it's easy to say, like, oh yeah, sleep's important and then not get any. Well, hydration falls under that same belt. Like, oh yeah, it's just drinking water. Well, no, it's not. And most people are dehydrated. So,
but we are getting a little long in the tooth on the hydration, so we'll move on to the myth section.
I just have one more study on hydration. So I found a really cool study on basically explaining that water is less hydrating than you think. And I will link all these sources that I used. My friend Emily, that was the shout out to her, because she asked if we could put the sources in the show notes, and I think that's a good idea. So thanks, Em. So this is called a randomized trial to assess the potential of different beverages to affect hydration status, a development of beverage hydration index. So I'll go through this pretty quickly, but basically beverage hydration index is they would have someone drink a standard treatment with still water, and then they would have someone drink a different beverage. And so they would then weigh or measure the amount of urine that was produced after a 2-hour period. And so water, ideally, with no electrolytes in it, would have a 1-to-1. And I think that's what they came up with. So then if something kept more fluid, it would have a higher beverage hydration index. So it'd be more than 1 means you're retaining more fluid. So they did a whole range of drinks. I'm not going to tell you all the drinks. I'm just going to tell the pertinent information. 1 hour after the ingestion of drinks, urine mass was lower and net fluid balance was higher for the still water drink after the ingestion of full fat milk, higher than still water, just to be clear. So for full fat milk, skim milk, ORS, which is oral rehydration solution. So that would be, like we just mentioned, drip drop and that kind of stuff. So full fat, skim, and ORS all had better hydration retention. So lower urine mass and higher net fluid balance at 1 hour, 2 hours, and 3 hours following ingestion. I think orange juice at 2 and 3 hours also had better fluid retention. After 4 hours, orange juice fell off again and did not have better retention. After 2 hours, full fat milk, skim milk, ORS, and orange juice had higher BHI, that beverage hydration index, than still water. And at 3 and 4 hours after consumption, they kind of eventually kind of said that 2 hours is the most pertinent because most people aren't going to go more than 2 hours without having something else to drink. But even still, the trend is showing, and this is statistically significant. So it was to a large effect and statistically showed that time and time again, these drinks, milk was more hydrating over a long period of time than water.
Yeah, and that's a surprising one for me.
Well, and it makes sense because of the calories, the sugar involved, the solute. So basically, water's going to follow salt. Like, it creates a gradient. If there's too much salt, water's going to flow in. If there's not enough salt, salt's going to come in, but salt pulls water. So water and salt follow each other around the body everywhere. I mean, that's just what you get. That's why they're tied so closely together. Well, carbs do it to some degree. Protein does it to some degree. Like, they all incorporate and include water and use water for transport. So having those things in the beverage is probably going to pull water into the system. And then with this increased solute, you're going to need more water to balance out and make the volume of blood, whatever cell you're in, that kind of stuff, balanced. So basically, and it's not in these notes I took, but to less of a degree, and not, I don't think it was statistically significant, but Coke, Diet Coke, things like that actually had slightly better scores than water because of the sodium and things like that are in it. So it just goes to show, like, that the whole point of that study is that water is not the end all be all to hydration. Like, if you are having issues with hydration, you might want to try, I would say, go to the ORS because they're specifically designed to help with hydration and bringing stuff into the system. But, it's not just water and call it a day. Like, you might need something a little more advantageous to improve your hydration scores. Yeah. So that's the point of that study, in my opinion.
Yeah. And so that's just another little takeaway of that is, I mean, the whole thing. Water's not all it's cracked up to be. It's great. It's wonderful. Mm-hmm. But anything liquid is going to be hydrating, and shit, if milk is going to be more hydrating than just straight water. And if you have the two, I would stay away from whole milk just at a minimum calories levels. We still don't want to be over consuming calories because then that leads to a bunch of different issues, including the obesity epidemic that we have.
I also wouldn't drink milk before I worked out.
Well,
like, that seems,
yeah.
Like, that's it's not quite as easy on your stomach, which is why I said ORS. Yeah. But they also did adjust for water content. Okay. So, like, milk's only about 88% water, so they adjusted for that. And I think orange juice, because of the level of sugar in it, kind of fell out as far as its effectiveness, but milk, ORS, and skim milk were all still more hydrating than water, even adjusting for water content. So, but yeah, that's just a cool study that a lot of people wouldn't think about. So
yeah, it took me by surprise. I'll probably make an Instagram post about that. So.
Yeah, I mean, yeah. It's...
But for our little myth busting this episode, wow, I can't talk. We're going to talk about negative energy foods, and the idea behind that is things like celery, very fibrous vegetables. A lot of people think that, it's hard for your body to break down, so your body has to expend more energy breaking it down than it actually gets from it, therefore creating a negative calorie balance in there. And I just want to start off by, there's no way. So without looking into any sort of research on that, I would assume if there was something that was harder for your body to get energy out of, your body wouldn't want to. Through evolution, your body's become super efficient. So if you were going to lose energy, which as evolutionary organism trying to survive, that's a huge issue, you would not want to eat that. We don't eat rocks because we don't get shit from rocks. So
Right.
if you
I
were,
mean, you could
I mean,
get
you
minerals
could,
from
you could,
them.
you could definitely
Like,
get minerals from it, but there are much better ways to get minerals that you're also going to get energy from. So your body, you are much more inclined to pick up a banana than you are a pebble from outside and start chewing on it, outside of the fact that it'll break your teeth.
right.
But in so this idea, it's huge in just diet trend circles, things like that. But it's also led to what people call net carbs. They're like, oh, well, you take your carbohydrate number and you subtract the amount of fiber from it because you don't get any calories from the fiber. So fiber is harder for your body to break down, but once it gets to your colon where you have gut bacteria, they start to break that down for you and they create short chain fatty acids, which are necessary for you, and your body gets energy from that. So where your body can't break it down, you have another organism inside of you doing it for you so that you can still get benefits from it. So negative energy foods and I keep wanting to say calories, net carbohydrates, I do not believe are a thing, period. And I'll fight that till the day I die.
Right. And so that's I agree because even when you look up negative calorie foods, it tells you the number of calories in these foods. I think the most classic example is celery. Um,
I
which
think that
actually
was
when
the
when
example
you look at it,
used when I asked.
lettuce and cucumbers both have fewer calories per cup, but they aren't typically mentioned. So here's the thing: is if you're trying to use negative calorie foods for increasing the amount of use that your body goes through and energy your body utilizes to break them down from a weight loss or fat loss standpoint, like no, there's no way that this is going to affect your thermic effect in of food or increase your body's core temperature or cause any kind of noticeable increase in calories. Um, or calories utilized. So I just don't get me wrong. Like all the foods listed here: celery, carrots, lettuce, broccoli, grapefruit, tomatoes, cucumbers, watermelon, apples. Which apples? No, apples are about 100 calories a pop, just like bananas. Like 60 if it's a smaller apple. Not a negative calorie food. Like yeah, they're high in pectin and they have but they're great. They have fiber. They have awesome vitamins and minerals. They're good foods to eat, but not because they have negative calories, quote unquote. But I totally agree with you. Net carbs is a bullshit system because some fiber is broken down. Most sugar alcohols, which are also counted negatively against net carbs, have calories. Splenda has calories because it's made with maltodextrin. People don't realize that. It doesn't have the same insulin response as the same amount of sugar, but it does have, I think it's 3 calories per packet or 3 calories per gram. It's lower than 4, so they can say none, but Splenda has calories. I mean, maltodextrin, which is the basis of what makes Splenda look like sugar, is dextrin. It's carbohydrate. It has calories, so that whole the net carbs thing is bullshit. Like
Yeah.
that's keto people. I call them ketards making up a way to eat carbs still. But fiber is a carb, so
Yeah.
it's I mean like if you're boiling it down, you are eating carbs. I hate to break it to
Yep.
you.
And I really think like as far as negative energy foods, I would assume that came about because you had this group of people who ate a certain way, and then you have this other group of people that all they really changed was they started adding high fiber whole foods to their diet. So one, higher fiber foods, they're going to keep you full longer. You're not likely to snack, kind of mindless eat as much. And then on top of that, whole foods compared to processed foods, whole foods don't have nearly as many calories in it. So if because negative energy foods are always talked about in the realm of weight loss, if you're trying to lose weight by eating a food that's going to make you burn fat, don't worry about that. Just focus on the higher fiber foods, the whole foods, the less processed foods, because you keep that up and stay consistent with it, you're gonna lose weight. So as long as you're not overcompensating and mistracking if you're tracking food, like be honest with yourself, but you're gonna lose weight switching to whole foods because they're less energy dense. You're gonna feel better. you're going to be more full. Don't look for the shortcut, but in this instance, in the shortcut, there's a little bit of background truths in there.
Right. And I'd argue that protein, calories and all, is going to do more to increase
Mm-hmm.
your fat burn and thermic effect than any of these foods. To be a champion of these foods is not, I'm not saying don't eat them or don't use them because of their low calorie content or their high fiber. These foods are great. Watermelon's awesome if you want a snack because you can have a whole cup for 46 calories. Um, if you are making a stir fry, adding more broccoli and carrots and things like that, and adding veggies instead of more rice or more fat to bulk up your meal is going to, one, help you feel more full, and two, help you lose weight. But doing it because they're quote unquote negative calories, I don't know. Like, that sounds like going to jail because they let you work out. Like, it's not a good way to like inspire change. So
Hey, I mean, you get to work out, you have a
yeah,
community,
you get
like
a place to sleep.
you
Yeah,
get
it's
abused, like so. I mean, like if you're into being degraded, jail sounds great. Anyway,
yeah.
we're gonna swiftly move on from that one there. But for as far as diet and fitness trends go, I did find an article from the Shape magazine where it was talking about counting calories and tracking fitness, things like that, caused this person to develop an eating disorder. And so, while actually Blair's got a whole thing here, neither of us really believe in that, but your eating disorders are genetic. It runs in my family. I get that. It's something that I kind of keep an eye out for. But it's not the counting calories. And if you are, where my take is, if you do have a higher risk of developing an eating disorder, or if you have an eating disorder, that's where things like health at every size do come in. Not like we tried to chop up last time, where we don't believe you can be healthy at every size, but you can go about pursuing health without considering weight. So kind of focusing on more nutritious foods, which is a huge trend in the dietetics world.
Right. And so, like Nick said, the title article is something along the lines of how counting calories helped me lose weight, but then gave me an eating disorder. And my major issue with this is the title and the blame. Because when you read this story, she had an eating disorder from at least 13 years old. Um, these apps didn't give her an eating disorder. She was overweight at 13. Um, she has clearly shown binge and purge behaviors across her life. She went from overweight to overly counting things, and like she said she would even count things when she went over just to see how far over she went, but then she started getting meticulous and kept cutting her calories down and down and down and got like grotesquely skinny and blah blah blah. But to me, like, she had an eating disorder to begin with. You don't get to be obese at 13 years old without having at least disordered eating and likely an eating disorder. Um, so saying these apps gave me an eating disorder is a lie. She had the tendency and the mentality to develop an eating disorder. And I'm not saying they didn't hurt or that they were not a help in some way, but I don't think it's fair to say apps gave me an eating disorder. Like, plenty of people use apps and don't develop eating disorders, so that's my take on that part of it. I do like how they mention that intuitive eating took a lot of time, and she still sees a therapist and still struggles to this day, even though she's at a healthier body weight. So those three things were big to me, is that it actually did touch on the intuitive eating and the amount of time it takes, which is something we talked about last episode. Um, and then they mention, and this is Shape magazine, so I don't know how, take it as far as you can throw it, but they have a line in here. It says, plus BMI is a super flawed measurement of health, if you haven't heard by now, and then links to a different article. And, I mentioned BMI earlier, and that my BMI's, I'm overweight. I'm close to obese, actually. I think if you did my BMI, I could do it right now and tell you, but it doesn't really matter. I'm overweight per BMI. It is not a flawed health metric. it is flawed in its use by most people. So if I'm a personal trainer or if I'm, a health practitioner, oh, I am a dietitian. Um, I'm not going to take your BMI and track your progress that way because based on muscle gain and all kinds of factors, hydration, your BMI, you might stay overweight, especially if you're like a man in decent shape. Women who do CrossFit, not a single one of those girls are in a healthy BMI. I can almost guarantee it. But they look great. They're active. They take care of themselves. BMI is used as a screening tool. If I take a population and this population is on average 32 BMI, I'm willing to bet it's not a bunch of bodybuilders. Like it's telling me that most of the people in this community are obese, have a over fat, over obese issue. So that's the point of BMI. You got to look at it like a stereotype, and I know this is something that people have a hard time with. Stereotypes are not intrinsically wrong. They're based on how 51% of a population behaves. The issue with stereotypes is taking that stereotype and applying it to every single person of that population. So because 51% of people in X group do something doesn't mean that every single person of X group does that thing. It just means as a group majority, that's the case. That's how BMI works. If the screening tool says that everyone in this population is obese, almost everyone in this population is going to be obese. It's not going to be a bunch of people with aggressive amounts of muscle mass that are just reading improperly. But when you apply it to one person, BMI becomes much less accurate. That's ultimately the way you have to look at BMI. So,
Yeah. And it's exactly like you said, it's a screening tool, but honestly, I believe for the average American, BMI is a fantastic
absolutely agree.
way to peg you. As much
Totally
as
agree.
it's demonized, but it is demonized because you have people who are above average in muscle, and everybody looks at them and they're like, oh, well, they're healthy, they look great. There's another key, they look great. So you're using the improper scale, which would be an above average person, and also considering physique in their health, which isn't as correlated. You can still be metabolically unhealthy and look fantastic, but we won't get into that. But
Right.
like I said, for the average American, if you're just at home and you're like, I would consider myself pretty average, and you want to know where you set and where this kind of puts you, you can pull up a BMI chart and check that and screen yourself. And if you're in an area where you're concerned, go, okay, well, what can I fix? Or maybe if you're inclined to body dysmorphia, things like that, you pull up your BMI and you're smack dab in the middle. That's super comforting. So
I
it's
agree.
really, yeah, it applies. I do believe it applies to the average American, and also again, it's individual. It's individual. If you don't want to use it, you can use something else, hip to waist ratio, things like that. Or again, where health at every size comes in, don't focus on weight, don't focus on physique, look at your lifestyle. Do you lead an objectively healthy lifestyle? And I know with stereotypes, Blair said 51% of the time. I would say with lifestyle, 50.1% of the time. So just if it's a little bit over half, yeah, that's majority still. So
Right.
if you live a majority healthy lifestyle, I would say you're fine. You don't have to look at weight, but if you do want to look at weight and you're an average person, BMI probably fits you.
Right.
So,
Cool. Well,
but,
yeah. So,
yeah, that
words
kinda,
of wisdom this week is definitely going to be on the political, which
yeah.
is this Black Lives Matters movement. So here's my thing. Anybody who has something to say against Black Lives Matters, and I know I'm kind of stealing this from the health at every size thing that I didn't like last week, but this is a little different. If you have something counterintuitive to say against Black Lives Matters, especially all lives matter, shut up. Like, at no point does that statement say Black Lives Matter more. What they're fighting for is for Black lives to matter as much, and they don't at this point in our country. So really, like, we have the ability to do something, to change, to be a voice. I saw a post where apparently a bunch of people were protesting and all the police started getting violent and they yelled out white shield and a bunch of white people came to the front of the protest line and lined up and the cops stopped acting as aggressive because they were about to start hurting white citizens, which is astounding to me, but it's awesome that those people were there for that reason. So that's my words of wisdom is step outside yourself and really like the number of people who just feel like it's this radical idea that anybody different than them is a human. Like these people are human. Like these, I don't care, black, Asian, white, brown, whatever the hell you want to look at, they're human. And we find these ways to divide ourselves, whether it's religion or race or sexual orientation or whatever it is. And I'm the first person to argue against forced equality, but there absolutely needs to exist an equality of opportunity, which means that everybody needs to be left to their own devices. They need the same opportunity to start from, and that doesn't occur. People are not offered the same starting point. People are offered, they're not even running the same race a lot of the time. And I think that's an issue is that we have systematically oppressed and given people the utmost chance to fail at every stage of their life and then blame them for it. And I think that's ridiculous. So stop with the all lives matters. If you aren't in support of Black Lives Mattering, you are an inhuman piece of garbage. And I will not back down from that because these are people.
Going hard
Most
this episode too.
it is. Most of I worked in the NFL. Like 85+% of the people I worked with on a daily basis were Black. And I love them to death. Like they're some of the nicest, most genuine people I've ever met in my life.
I would say somebody looking from the outside would say that so 85% are Black, but also came from disadvantaged communities,
Absolutely.
disadvantaged families. So I mean, you're talking Blair's somebody who's been right there, who's talked to these people, who not only did they grow up in it, they got to make it to the ultimate in athletic performance in being an NFL player.
I would be lying if I said that I haven't heard more than a dozen times that my choices were sell drugs or play sports. And I chose sports. I mean, like that from multiple people. I mean, a lot of the people I worked with in the NFL, I've heard that same. Those were the choices, and some people pick sports and still can't escape it. But
not everybody's an NFL player.
Or injuries, and then they're right back to their old lifestyle. Because it just sucks, man. Like you don't know what they're going through. I don't, and if you want to take a look at what's going on with Drew Brees in the media right now. I mean, the man made some statement about disrespecting the flag, and he'll never agree with someone, which caused me to lose respect. But he's gained some of my respect back because he's turned around and he's very apologetic for his ignorance. I mean, he admits being ignorant and that he didn't realize, even with how much he's done for New Orleans, how quickly people can turn on you because of a statement you made and because he didn't understand his own privilege. And I think that's part of the issue is like, I've never feared the cops in my life other than, I might get a ticket for driving too fast, but it's never been a fear for my life. I've never felt unsafe in my life. And that's astounding. I don't think a single Black person in this country can say that confidently, and that bothers the shit out of me. So yeah, like I think, it's, you got to step outside your privilege and understand, like, people got a lot harder than you. Like people protesting so they can get a fucking haircut, and they're complaining about these protests going on. Like that's insane to me. Like fuck your hair, shave your head, and do something that matters with your life. Like right. I don't take this shit. Like I don't. Yeah. Like I'm pretty joking, like coy, casual individual, but like I don't take that shit as lightly. Like I get pissed. So
yeah. Like and I mean, shit. You need a haircut? Do what we're doing. We're both wearing hats. Like,
yeah. Oh yeah. My hair looks like garbage. It's too much longer. I'm gonna be Steve Harrington from fucking Stranger Things.
Like, so my sign off.
Just drop my hat.
My sign off is gonna be a little bit less aggressive, but I mean along the same lines as political. There is a lot going on in the United States right now, and it's exhausting. So it's exhausting for me as a straight white male. So I can only imagine how exhausting it is for people who are directly affected by racial injustice and police brutality. And so I kind of feel like I don't have a right to be tired. But anyway, really what I wanted to get to was, it's a little cliche, but perpetuate love. Like, everybody's tired, everybody's upset. Just kind of try to just love everybody. Love everybody. If you know me personally and you're friends with me on Facebook, I've been going pretty hard for the past couple days, and so it's weird to kind of see the other side of it. But just perpetuate love. Love everybody. So
Yeah, I agree with that. So, yeah, that's it for this episode.
Yeah.
Make sure you follow, like, subscribe, whatever the hell you're supposed to do with each platform, whether that's YouTube or one of the podcast outlets. But, you know, and feel free, like we said, comment and ask questions. Tell us your opinion if we pissed you off, if whatever. I mean, we might not change because of it, but go ahead and ask questions. And
especially with this tail end, with it getting political or shit with any of it, is if you have an issue and you tell us. If it's something that's like, oh, you're a piece of shit, blah blah blah, I promise you, I'm just gonna delete it. But if you're like, hey, you said this, I don't agree with it, here's why. Like, I love to discuss things, and you have have a chance
I'd like
to
that discussion.
changing my perspective. I have a chance to change your perspective, as long as it's mutually respectful. As soon as it gets disrespectful, it's just deleted. Like, ain't got no time for that shit. But
If someone can convince me to change my stance on where I just was about, if you can convince me that Black lives don't matter, I will quit my career and follow you to the ends of the earth, because I don't think it's going to happen. I know it's not going to happen, because there's no argument for it.
Yeah.
But yeah, I do agree. If you want to raise complaint, whether it's about this part or the nutrition, if you want to create a discourse so that we can talk to each other, and, whether you agree, don't agree, have questions, whatever it is, like, comment. But, just, we'd love it if you'd like and follow, and if you're into it, let us know we're doing a good job too. Like, I got a lot of good feedback from my friends. I wish they'd have done it on the social platform so other people can see that people are enjoying it, but I'll take a phone call telling me that it went well. So.
Oh yeah. And then last little thing, I promise for this episode, I'm not going to forget to trim the end of it. I don't know if you saw that there. So anyway.
Hey, I'm just hoping that my volume is loud enough I don't have to go edit everything this time. So,
I'm watching the bar every so often get completely maxed out. So we might have the opposite issue, but you can turn it down a little bit. Yeah, I would rather be too loud than not loud enough with the issues I'm having on my side with the microphone.
Yeah, I'm concerned that, like, mine doesn't. Oh, yours does it too. Even when you're not talking, it bounces at the bottom. Okay, so I was just hoping there wasn't a bunch of white noise or something.